afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second annual Vision and Intention Challenge with Bring Freedom. I'm Dixie.
And I'm Sona.
We're so excited that you're here. This will be the first session, and we'll have the second session later at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. So make sure and set your alarms or whatever you have to do to come back at 5 o'clock, and we'll go live on YouTube and LinkedIn again. And this session, what are we going to focus on?
So, we have had several people ask us if we are only an organization that focuses on sex trafficking, and we are not. And one of the things that we have kind of scoured the world for is really great training on labor trafficking that is up to date, that is accurate, so that you know what are those red flags, what are those yellow flags, who do you even report that stuff to, like where does that go? Because it's not quite the same premise, and a lot of times there's some bleed over where it might start as labor trafficking and move towards the other. It might start as sex trafficking and move toward or include labor trafficking.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to bring on an expert. So Abdallah Toro is an amazing speaker, and she does this professionally. So she's actually on the Human Trafficking Task Force for the state of South Carolina.
Oh, wonderful. I'm excited.
Yeah. I'm excited too. So make sure you guys stay tuned. We're going to show, because she had a graduation today for the family, which we always celebrate family. That's really important. So we're gonna bring her on, and we're gonna let her present to you because she has amazing slides. It is incredibly information packed. Truly amazing.
I'm excited.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We have an amazing guest speaker who is going to be speaking on labor trafficking and what we need to know. So we are very excited to have Abdallah Toro with us. She is a dynamic bilingual professional with a diverse background in workforce development, advocacy, and community engagement spanning over a decade. Graduating summa cum laude with a degree in psychology, she has dedicated herself to breaking down language barriers and promoting workplace rights and personal wellness. Abdallah serves the community in various capacities, from being a member of South Carolina's Immigrant Victim Coalition Strategic Committee to co-chairing the Labor Trafficking Subcommittee under the Human Trafficking Task Force. In her roles as the State Compliance Systems Specialist and State Monitor Advocate in South Carolina, Abdallah is deeply entrenched in community outreach and support. She handles inquiries and complaints, ensuring victims are aware of their rights and options for relief, and serving as a referral facilitator. As a state monitor advocate, she meticulously monitors employment service delivery to migrant and seasonal farm workers, conducting reviews, field visits, and providing recommendations for improvement. Abdallah's advocacy extends beyond her official roles, collaborating with a plethora of organizations like ours. She strives to enhance workers' rights and support survivors through research and arranging supportive services that facilitates relief and survivor cooperation with investigations. From liaising with government agencies like SLED, USDOL, WHD, to the HSI, collaborating with immigrant coalitions, Abdallah strives to be a driving force for positive change in service delivery and labor rights awareness in South Carolina. We're so glad you're here today.
Same. I'm glad to be here. It's an
Uh,
honor.
Thank you. So we are recording this because she had a family engagement, which is very exciting. So thank you for taking time out of your week to go ahead and record this with us ahead of time and to really answer some burning questions that people have about labor trafficking. What are people's rights? How do you know if somebody is being trafficked? Lots of labor trafficking questions.
Of course. It is my pleasure to be here, and I hope to answer all those questions.
Wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and excuse myself, and then we'll bring up your presentation. All right.
Okay. All right, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you, although electronically. But today we're going to talk about a very important topic: the unseen chains, unmasking the reality of labor trafficking. I will focus heavily on the labor trafficking piece of human trafficking. So, one of the things that is important when talking about labor trafficking or human trafficking in general is that we have to recognize that there's two sides to human trafficking, right? So in much the same way that a coin has two sides, human trafficking, metaphorically speaking, would be that coin. On one side, you have sex trafficking, and then on the other side, you have labor trafficking. And so when we speak or we talk or we discuss human trafficking, it is important to keep in mind that it really does have two sides to it. It's just that people tend to know more about sex trafficking than labor trafficking, but we're bridging that with this conversation that we're having today. So, first of all, of course, we need to start with the federal definition of human trafficking. But we're going to go into the elements, the individual elements of this definition later on in the presentation, because my aim is also to simplify it and put it to practical terms. So, federally speaking, human trafficking, according to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjugation to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. It is important to note that this is a serious crime. It involves compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or services, which can include commercial sex acts. So these are very often intersected. Now, another important thing to mention is that coercion can be subtle. It is not always obvious. It's not always something that you can see, because there are elements that are physical, yes, which are the most obvious signs, those that are easier to recognize. But then there's your psychological manipulation, the grooming that sometimes takes place in labor trafficking. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. So, to put it in simple terms, in simple practical terms, human trafficking is when someone is forced, tricked, or coerced into doing work or providing services against their will. And labor trafficking is all about work or services. This can include physical force, threats, or manipulation to control them. Now, the purpose is usually to exploit them for labor or services, such as working without pay or under harsh living and working conditions. It can also involve forcing someone into commercial sex acts, which is another form of exploitation. This could also be a strategy that is used to force someone, or it could later become something that is included in their duties. Okay, so, but it is a serious violation of human rights where individuals are deprived of their freedom and treated as commodities. Now, this specific slide, I did a particular exercise because one of the things that I like to advocate for, I'm a state monitor advocate, so I advocate for so many things. But one of the things that I like to advocate for is language accessibility. And language accessibility goes beyond interpretation and translation of documents or information into other languages. Language accessibility is also about making your information easy to understand. So that's why I have this slide, because in the previous slide you had the federal definition, but when you're trying to explain this to someone you're talking to, or to someone that's coming to you with concerns, this is the way that is ideally explained, taking the federal language and digesting it down so that someone that has never heard of this before can walk away from this conversation feeling like they understood. And so in order to do this, I did an exercise where I asked rephrasing software to help me with this. And I asked the software, hey, can you simplify this for me in a way that perhaps a 13-year-old can understand? And voila, you have the verbiage there. And that's something that I'd like to recommend to victim service providers and to organizations that are engaging in this work. And this is something that you'll see me repeat later on in the presentation. Now, this is when we are going to go into each of the elements in depth and discuss how this happens in the realm of labor trafficking. Okay, so I work in the Department of Employment and Workforce. We are South Carolina's workforce agency. So we have a hand, we have a perspective that is unique with regards to this, because we have a lot of employers in recruitment. So what you see on the screen, I'm sure that you've probably seen it before, is the AMP model as provided by Polaris, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And in order to meet the federal definition of human trafficking, there has to be an element of there has to be an action, means, or a purpose, unless the person that is going through this is a minor under the age of 18. In that case, force, fraud, or coercion do not need to be involved. So going in depth about these elements, recruiting. So practically speaking, if you and I are looking for work, we go to a job fair, the employers are there trying to recruit. They are talking about the benefits, they're talking about the job duties, but the point is that that information is being presented to you in such a way that you'd make a decision to do something for them. In other words, to work for them in exchange for those benefits and that pay. So this recruitment is providing you with information to get you to do something in exchange for something. So working and services in exchange for wages, etc., etc. So the recruitment action, this can look so differently. And one of the cautions that I like to say is, in the recruitment phase, always get it in writing. It's very important to document everything, because this can happen a lot with verbal agreements, because there's nothing in writing. There's no evidence. There's no paper trail. So in this recruitment aspect, this recruitment action is very important to document. And then we have harboring. This is providing a place to stay. In the case of migrant workers or individuals that come to this country with an employment visa, this is particularly common and particularly important because employers are sometimes required by law to provide workers with a place to stay, with a place to live. So this is where this harboring can come into play. Domestically speaking, right here in the United States, it means the same thing, although different, right? Because this is happening right here in the United States. But it could very well mean the same thing as providing a place to stay. If we have the means of force, which can be kidnapping and confinement, this can be the place where the victim at this point is being kept. And then we have the action of transporting, very common again with migrant workers. with workers that come here from another country, because again, federal law requires some of the employers, depending on the visa, right, to provide free transportation. So transporting and recruitment in the case of migrant workers, some of the unseen elements here take place in their country of origin. And so in here, we are connecting the invisibility of some of these signs. Because this is something that here in the United States, we don't see as organizations. So the recruitment, harboring, transporting could be crossing country lines, borders. It could also be crossing county lines and state lines. And to the next point, to provide people, to provide individuals to other employers, other establishments. Think of like a staffing agency, for instance. They do recruitment on behalf of an employer, right? And they provide workers to companies that are needing them. But through recruitment, they can also obtain a person, right? And so through the means, we have three main categories. So we have the force, which is your physical assault, your sexual assault is confinement. This, in the case of labor trafficking, though it is not always the case, but it can certainly happen. This is where you could see probably smuggling and kidnapping in their country and bringing them here. And sometimes they don't follow the legal processes because they're kidnapped and they're smuggled into the country for work without having to pay for an employment visa and so on and so forth. And these are just some of the many possible scenarios. And then we have fraud, which is the other means. And in the context of labor trafficking, this is extremely common. This is almost always present because they are recruited with false promises about payment, work, and living conditions. And then what happens is that when these workers get here, they have this contract sometimes, because sometimes that's not even provided to them in a language that they can understand as it is required by the law. When they get here believing in these false promises, then you see traffickers withholding wages. They're not paying them what they were promised. They're not paying them the rate that is on the contract. And the work and living conditions are dangerous, inhumane, and not at all how they were promised. And then coercion, we see some invisible things here as well, such as threats of deportation. Threats of deportation is very effective against migrant workers. And it is something that is seen often in these cases. These threats of harm or deportation, if they should talk to investigators, or if they should testify, or if they should confirm that indeed the working, the paying, the living conditions are not as promised in the contract fact, sometimes individuals that are trafficked, labor trafficked, get coached into what they need to say to investigators or to individuals trying to help them to avoid being caught, right? So we see this coercion there, that bondage, the psychological manipulation. This is where we see relationships being leveraged here, particularly like family members to do that recruitment. But a key element is the confiscation of documents. So in the context of migrant workers, they need a passport to be able to travel, right? Much the same way that you and I need a passport to be able to travel in and out of the United States to other countries. So what about those of us that work here in the United States? Well, you need a driver's license to be able to drive freely, right? And without fear in the highways. So this confiscation of documents, it's a method to control their movements and prevent their escape. And of course, for the purposes of commercial sex acts or forced labor or services, or all of it, because these are often intersected, as you can see in the important points. But what happens is that labor trafficking is often under-identified. There simply isn't enough knowledge and enough training out there for labor trafficking. We have more resources, more funding, more organizations dealing and working with sex trafficking than labor trafficking. As a result, it is not as widely understood. So as a result as well, is misidentified and minimized. And one of the ways that it is minimized is perhaps by cultural understanding. So if I'm an employer that is bringing workers from another country to work, say in agriculture, which is one of the top venues for labor trafficking, people might look at, construction or agriculture and think, oh yeah, that's hard work. It's supposed to be hard work, and these statements that we make, it's supposed to be hard work. Construction, oh yeah. Landscaping, oh yeah. Agriculture, yes, you're working out in the sun. It's really hard work. But these statements, depending on who or how often are made, can go towards minimizing labor exploitation, right? Because it could potentially reach a point where working excessively long hours becomes part of the norm, right? And misidentified labor trafficking being misidentified it points to the same thing. If I don't know enough about it, I don't know how to identify it, and so maybe I'll just write it off as labor exploitation and not really labor trafficking. So we talked about some of the venues already, agriculture. But according to studies done by Polaris, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, these are the top 10 venues for labor trafficking. Now, if you take a look down this list, just glancing at it, you'll see that a lot of them involves working outside, which connects to what I was saying earlier. This minimizing this, like, oh, you're working outside, you're working in this, that, and the third. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be dangerous, right? But you look in this list, you see agriculture, farms, landscaping, construction, manufacturing, janitorial, restaurant, and food services. You also see hospitalities. You also see illicit activities such as like the massage parlors and stuff like that. And an important note about this list is that many of these venues tend to request H-2A and H-2B temporary work visa. They tend to use that employment visa program or other types of employment-based visa programs. And the H-2A visa program is to bring workers from other countries to work in agriculture temporarily. The H-2B visa is to bring workers from another country to work here in the United States temporarily, but not in agriculture. So this is why you see the restaurant, the food services, the janitorials, and the hospitalities. That's why you see venues like that. Now, what you are about to see in this slide are real statistics. South Carolina SLED provided these statistics, and these are as recent as December of 2023, last year. Now, in 2023, they opened about 358, 357 cases. And as you can see from these statistics, the majority of it was sex trafficking. But remember what we said before, that labor trafficking is underreported, is misidentified, and is minimized. We're seeing the impact in the statistics. But still, a good chunk of those cases contain elements of both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. The cases, look at the areas. The upstate is number one with cases, followed by what? Midlands, where I am in Colombia. So you can see how prevalent this is, how common this is. It's very possible that you might go to a restaurant where this is happening and you don't know it, because it is really, really that widespread. And because labor traffic is underreported, we may be going to establishments where this is happening. And again, part of the redundancy, it may be happening and we don't know about it. But you can appreciate by the statistics how widespread this is. Now, let's talk about the victims at that point, who later then become survivors, because they can really be anyone. And it is important to keep an open mind about this, because sometimes we can get into the mentality of that cannot possibly happen to me, or my daughter, or my son, or my cousin, or my family member, or my friend, or whoever that you know, that can never happen to them, right? it is very important to keep an open mind because this can happen to absolutely anyone. Although there are common categories, as you can see in this slide. The common categories often belong to marginalized communities and other vulnerable individuals, such as children. There's a rise in child labor, in manufacturing plants and slaughterhouses. The U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour has often issued press releases, announcing their concluded investigations where they have found child labor violations. And this includes the victims can include children in the child welfare system or children who have been involved in the juvenile justice system, runaways, homeless, or unaccompanied children. Now, unaccompanied children are often children that cross the border to reunite with family members here in the United States. And so when individuals, such as the next point, that do not have a lawful immigration status here in the United States, such as migrant laborers, they come here, one of the important things to keep in mind is that they don't know this country. They don't understand this country, the legal system, the organizations that are out there. They don't know their rights. They don't know, for example, that there are rights that can be applied to individuals even without a lawful immigration status in this country, because everyone has a right to be safe where they work. So traffickers often exploit the innocence of children, the vulnerabilities of children. They prey upon that. The persons with disabilities and individuals with substance use disorders. That is something that can also be used by traffickers to create dependency, right? And they are deceived. Victims are deceived by false promises of love. That's why the victims tend to fall in the marginalized communities and groups and vulnerable groups, because criminals know, okay, this particular group of individuals have a specific set of needs. If I can just figure out how to talk to them, figure out how to talk to that need, figure out how to fill that void with my words, then I can get them to do what I want. And so they're deceived by promises of love, a good job, and high wages, or a stable life, stability that sometimes members of these marginalized communities don't have, right? And so they're lured or forced into situations where they are made to work under deplorable conditions with little to no pay. And in the United States, this can happen to US citizens or foreign citizens, which happens to be in labor trafficking, happens to be most common, right? But it can happen to US citizens. Now, let's look at more statistics, but this time by Polaris, and the statistics are from 2022. So They received about 498 cases, and the breakdown of victims, a large chunk of it is unknown or underidentified. But then you see the other races that are broken down. We definitely see this as something that is not surprising, because the tendency is to report sex trafficking, labor trafficking, not so much. So it is of no surprise that a lot of the victims were minors, majority of them. And likewise, the majority of the victims were female, although we can see that there's been an increase in male victims as well. Now, let's talk about these criminals. Let's unmask. So, perpetrators and techniques vary. Okay. It's kind of like the criminals that are always after our data on the internet. All of these data breaches, they evolve. The perpetrators and the techniques, the ways to deceive people evolve. They can act alone or as part of an organized criminal enterprise. They can all be joined together in a group. They can be foreign nationals or United States citizens. It can be anyone. They could be family members, unfortunately, in cases of estranged family members, or family members that have not seen each other for years, and all of a sudden the family member gets offered this business or this opportunity where they can make money. We see a lot of that deceit happening there. Intimate partners. This is where you can see the intersection with domestic violence. Using domestic violence, or perhaps using the fiancé visa program to bring people from other countries here, again, under the false pretense and false promises of love, to then force them to do other things. Acquaintances and strangers, of course employers, but pimps as well. Because remember that with labor trafficking, it could also include commercial sex, and it could also include, sex services. Okay? Smugglers, gang members, diplomats, business owners, labor recruiters and contractors, farm, factory, and company owners. It's very common to see it in the farm, factory, company owners, labor recruiters, and contractors, because of their unique position to recruit, hire, transport, obtain, and provide individuals. So that brings then the other important point, that the recruiter or the immediate supervisor can be in a unique position of power, such as a language barrier, such as migrant workers that come here from other countries, and the recruiter just happens to speak their language or happens to be where they're from. So the traffickers can be bilingual and be in a position of power that isolates the workers due to language barriers. Because if I don't speak English, I need to depend on someone who does. So that creates this malignant dependency on the trafficker. And then, of course, they're not translating correctly, right? Or they might be translating conveniently. Now, let's look at some yellow flags. Okay, these are like heads up. Heads up before it happens, before it actually happens, before it is too late. Heads up. It's important to note that red and yellow flags vary per industry and context. So what you would notice at a hospital is totally different than what you'd notice at school or what you'd notice at home. It's different per industry. If you're working outside, like construction, landscaping, or if you're working in agriculture, right? If in the case of miners, if you have a part-time. So it really depends on the industry and the context. One of the yellow flags is that the employer refuses to give workers a signed contract with their name, their contact information, and they ask them to sign a contract in a language they can't read or they can't understand. By law, they have to provide a contract in a language that they can understand because people need to know what they're signing. People need to know, what am I getting myself into? And for that, it is necessary for the work contract, the terms and the conditions to be in a language that they can understand. Or they collect fees from the people that are being recruited for the opportunity to work. If you pay me such and such, right? This is very common in the case of migrant workers, that they pay like tens of thousands of dollars or pesos, whatever currency, for the opportunity to come here. And you might ask yourself, why? Well, it surely beats having to cross a desert, you know? So they pay in a way for convenience. It pays so that they can come here with an employment visa and protections. Okay. But again, this goes back to the deceit, the false promises. Another yellow flag is a person is offered a job opportunity that seems too good to be true. You know that saying, if it's too good to be true, right? You can probably complete the saying. So watch out for this. Another yellow flag is that it requires them to move away. And we can see this in the United States as well. When you're looking for work online, you're meeting people online, and there's this gig job or there's this opportunity. But for example, you might live in Washington State, and then the opportunity requires you to move to South Carolina or Florida. That's pretty far, right? But then again, the employer avoids answering questions. If it's a legitimate job offer, if it's a legitimate opportunity, the employer should not have a problem answering questions or providing details, right? But we see that reluctance to provide detailed information about the job. Okay, so these are things that you can watch out for before it happens. Now, what if it's happening? What if it's already happening? These are the red flags of labor trafficking. So, someone may be experiencing labor trafficking or labor exploitation if they feel pressure to stay in a job or a situation that they want to leave. Go back to that AMP model, that coercion, that forced. And they owe money to an employer or a recruiter, and they're not being paid what they were promised or owed. They do not have control of their passport or identity documents. This is a way to control movement, and this is a way to prevent them from either speaking up or escaping. They're living and working in isolated, inhumane conditions. They're largely cut off from interactions with others and support systems. This is especially true in the case of agriculture because a lot of the housing units are sometimes in the middle of nowhere. And so kind of have to pay attention to this in other employment opportunities that it just so happens to be providing living arrangements. Well, let's look at the state of those living arrangements, where those living arrangements are located, and they appear to be monitored by a person when talking or interacting with others. We can see this like performing outreach, like when we go to like farms, or we can see this. And when I say we, it's just generally speaking, but this can be seen, for instance, if they happen to walk to a clinic. Do you see someone just kind of hovering and just kind of looking at the paperwork, just kind of paying attention to what you're saying, or did you see them too closely together? So this monitoring aspect of it, the employees might be being threatened by their boss with deportation or harm. Their families could be being threatened here. So the boss or the employer, the recruiter or what have you, could be threatening these workers by saying that if you leave, we're going to hurt your family back home. Could happen. Or they're working in dangerous conditions without proper safety gear, training, or adequate breaks, or other protections. So typically, if you're being recruited to work for someone, there are certain things that the employer should provide free of charge. So if you are required to work with a hammer, for instance, and it's just strictly required by the job for the job, then the employer should be providing that. And sometimes what we see here is that the employees pay for it and they don't get to take those tools home with them. And the last point is, they're working in dangerous, they're living, in dangerous, overcrowded, or inhumane conditions provided by an employer. Now, in this screen, I have to preface this by saying that this is definitely not all of the typical needs of survivors. There's definitely many, many more. But some of the pressing ones that we have seen is safety and stability. Safety while they're considering leaving that situation, while they're leaving that situation, after leaving the situation. They need the stability. Their world has been rocked and they don't know where they are most of the time. They may not know the country, they might not know the state. They need safe, affordable housing, especially in the case where the employer was providing the housing for them. In the case of migrant workers, they need that immigration relief, especially if their passport and visas have been confiscated and stolen, and they are escaping for their life. They have essentially become undocumented, but they has just escaped for their lives. And so they need this immigration relief. They need a way to get another passport, to get another visa. Um, Potentially, continued presence, deferred action, a T visa or a U visa, a way to kind of stabilize them and allow them to stay here even after their work contract expires. And economic stability, they just lost their job. They were being trafficked, but it was their job and it was paying them wages, however little it might have been, right? So they need to work and they need timely and clear communication and education about resources and rights. This is especially important, for victim service providers and organizations out there that are working with survivors. Because when the survivor comes to you, if they trust you and they have decided to speak to you, they have so many questions. With labor trafficking, they don't know what their rights are. So it's very important to go out to them, and to talk to them about the resources that are in the community. What are their rights? The rights that work, their civil rights, and also to have timely and clear communications, because sometimes they have simple questions such as, hey, I need to go out to I need to go out and look for a job. However, I haven't received, any kind of paperwork that protects me or something like that. They may have sensitive and time sensitive questions for you that if you don't answer, or they have to wait like 2 or 3 weeks to hear from you, that goes back to affecting their stability and their trust, right? So very important to really be there for them. And while being there for them, here are some special considerations. Have flexible safety plans. Help them to elaborate that. While you're in the situation, protect your stuff, try to gather your stuff and keep it all together. During the escape, after they leave. And also consider that victims at that point, they may not know about human or labor trafficking. Might be the first time that they're hearing about this. Some cultures may not like to be called victims, or people in general may not like to be called victims. So consider using another term, for example, survivors, because if they are coming to you, they have survived. Have simple, flexible, yet effective screening and an intake process. And this goes out to the victim service providers and organizations working in this field, because sometimes we have so much legalese and so much technical language, which is another point. Refraining from doing that, especially when you're presenting to the public or when you're during the initial stages of intake and assistance. because the person is coming to you very confused, probably, and vulnerable. The least thing that they need is so much legalese and technical language and special lingo that they can't understand. You know, so in the initial stages, be flexible, because people may come to you and they may have no ID on them because it was stolen, right? So consider, how can I approach someone that doesn't have what what I need, what my organization needs to run them through our eligibility. So, and also be culturally sensitive. This goes back to one of the things that I mentioned earlier, is different cultures have different perspective of suffering. Some cultures are taught to tolerate more than others. The understanding is different. The interaction between male and female is different. With authority of figures is different. So it's important to be considerate of cultural backgrounds, researching the culture of the population that you're reaching or that are coming to you, or the victims or at that point, or survivors that have been referred to organizations or that you're talking to, and let this knowledge guide you. They will appreciate it. One of the nice things to learn in another language, it's two simple things, such as hi, use their name, thank you, use their name. So, for instance, in Spanish, hola, my name is Abdalis. So, hola, Abdalis. Gracias, Abdalis. So certain things to learn. And of course, advocating for immigration relief. Continued presence and other and deferred action, because this is going to protect the survivor, especially if the case is being investigated. These types of protection will allow them to stay and remain here in the United States, being protected from deportation. And they could remain here, they can travel safely, they could potentially get another job through the help of these immigration relief options. So always advocate for that, if the survivor at that point has an immigration status or doesn't, right? And here's some practical things to do. But before I get to these points, I really love this perspective and this picture, because we have often heard the saying, knowledge is power. But in actuality, knowledge is not power without action. So it actually is knowledge plus action is power. So here are some practical things to do. Definitely learn more about workplace rights. Learn the basics. There are really good websites out there that you can visit and learn about worker rights. And learn more about labor trafficking. Let's unmask this. Okay, the more we learn about labor trafficking, best. Keep an open mind and be vigilant. And this goes out especially for parents, because you might think, or the boyfriend, or the best friend, or they're just kidding around, or they're just being kids, or they're just being teenagers, or etc., etc. But as like we have just seen, traffickers can be anyone. And victims can be anyone. This can happen to anyone. Because at the core of this is deceit. There's lies, and there's false appearances. So keep an open mind and be vigilant. If you're noticing some things that are making you question, and you're like, then chances are your intuition is right. Okay. But learn more about worker rights, labor trafficking, and get to know key individuals that are combating human trafficking. And I have listed some example, though of course there's not all of them. But the state monitor advocate, I'm the state monitor advocate for South Carolina. The Department of Labor, Wage and Hour, Community Resource and Planning Specialist. SLED has a vice unit with special agents that are dedicated to investigating human trafficking, and so many more. But these individuals are required to be connected to the community and to other service providers. So when you talk to them, they can be a one-stop shop, so that they can send it to other enforcement agencies, right? Of course, increase the language accessibility and the availability of information. The more people can understand and get helpful information, the better. And display human trafficking posters in key locations, especially bathrooms, in various languages. Churches, schools, your location if you're a victim service provider, in community events, if you have porta potties. So have human trafficking posters available and post it everywhere. And these are helpful resources, right? So in here, and this is linked. So you'll get a link to the directory, the nationwide directory of state monitor advocates, just in case you happen to move or you happen to find out about a case in another state. The same thing with the Department of Labor, Wage and Hour division, the CORPS, which is short for the Community Outreach Resource Planning Specialists. You also have a link to the SLED Human Trafficking Special Agents. They're not named, but you do have a phone number that you can call and you'll be connected. You also have the link to a website where you can learn about worker rights. You also have the link for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. But I've got more resources for you. Remember how I mentioned about increasing language accessibility? Well, sometimes we don't have enough funding for contracts for, translation or interpretation services, depending on the structure, the size of the organization or whatnot, or if you're just a member of the public, of the general audience. But DeepL, according to them, they are the world's best machine translator. That's what they say, right? And their selling point is that they are that they have neural networks that are capable of capturing even the slightest nuances and reproduce them in translation. And they have tested this with human translators. And I have tested it as well. Well, the following resource is completely in Spanish. The information about the next point that I'm about to bring up is originally all in Spanish, and I use the people to translate it without doing any edits. Contratados.org. org. That whole paragraph was translated by people. And you can see how well it did it. Everything is understood. It has nice, good technical words in there as well. So it has taken context into context. But contratados.org, if you're working with someone that speaks and reads and writes Spanish, that is it's great because they have audio and they have a lot of information about their rights. And there's also a place where individuals can post complaints anonymously, available for everyone to see, which is great. And of course, contact information for foreign embassies and consulates in the United States, should that apply. And remember how I mentioned about safety planning? Well, Polaris has a website specifically for that. And you have those tips. And when you visit this website, you'll be able to get safety tips for a variety of situations. There's even cell phone apps that can be downloaded, and there's even tips on how to explain the red flags to victim survivors. Additional resources, there's the free trafficking prevention parenting guide by the Anti-Trafficking International. They're located in Virginia, but this is good if perhaps we have parents in the audience or parents that are concerned. It provides some really good tips on how to deal with situations. Now, the Office of Victims of Crime also has a whole webpage and comic books and audio about, child victims and witnesses support materials and how to talk to them, how to approach it, how to explain it. And it's actually broken down by age groups. The Homeland Security also has toolkits and guides, and they have posters. They have things that you can put in your social media. They have videos as well, trainings, and they have toolkits and guides for convenience stores, faith-based organizations, schools, hospitals. I mean, you name it. So these two are amazing with the resources that they provide. And of course, Polaris, we can't leave them out, and the National Human Trafficking Hotline, but they actually have a human trafficking 101 training. So this presentation will be shared so that when you get it, you'll be able to click on these links and it will take you directly to these resources. And I hope that this presentation has been meaningful to you, that it has been enlightening. It has been my absolute pleasure to be here with you. My name is Abdallah Storo, State Monitor Advocate and co-chair of the Labor Trafficking Subcommittee under the South Carolina State Attorney General's Human Trafficking Task Force. Thank you so much.
We are so grateful for just the sheer amount of information and resources you are able to compile so concisely. Thank you for that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you so much for doing this, for having me. I hope that this has been, enlightening, and that all the resources that will be shared really makes a difference. It marks a before and an after.
That was really, really good. Super informative.
Really yes. I will say that she has done an amazing job of compiling resources and
Mm,
having those available. We did put in the chat that if you are interested in any of the links to those resources, you can have the full PowerPoint that is completely available. And we want to make sure this information gets out. It really only benefits if we are having people get this information out. People can access it. It's easy to, share with a friend, that sort of thing. So she has every link that she put up there, all of the resources listed. And I really think that she helped because we had several people that were asking, like, how do you know if it's labor trafficking?
yeah,
Because it just
really
looks like
good.
work.
Yeah, it does, and it's hard to tell, especially if a business or an organization, you know, like the group of workers is all speaking a language that you don't know.
Hmm.
It's hard to really catch any like contextual clues there might be. And
It's
you
true.
don't want to making false accusations or
Yeah.
but you also don't want to ignore it if it is trafficking situation.
That's true. I actually had a situation where I was at a restaurant and I felt like a manager was yelling at an employee in a different language.
Mm,
And it was a restaurant that I went to pretty regularly. So
mm,
in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of responsible for if I think something is inappropriate happening. So I pull the worker aside and I said, hey, are you safe here? Was that on the up and up? Are you needing any sort of thing? And I will say, to their credit, I did consistently interact with that employee probably for the next year or two while
mm,
they worked in that location. But
okay.
sometimes you just don't know if you don't ask.
Yeah. And and even then you want to look at those tips
Hmm.
because sometimes they don't know really.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to self-identify in certain situations.
Hmm.
They just, sometimes it's just kind of a crappy work situation and not actually trafficking.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's family.
Right.
So, with family, sometimes maybe a little harsher than you would be with other employees.
Right.
So, so yeah,
Sure.
definitely like look back through those resources. All that it was really excellent training. So I am excited about our next session at 5 o'clock. All right,
Yep.
our session 2 of vision and intention, and should be good. We'll talk a little bit about our next training challenge coming up.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on a Saturday and for taking the time to learn a little bit more about labor trafficking in order for us to raise awareness and hopefully make it more common for people to report weird behavior, to understand when your gut is like, hey, maybe that's not okay. And, we can make this world a safer place, not just for us, but also for our kiddos. So,
Yes. All right. Thank you.
bye, guys.